Sometimes, evil doesn't knock. It enters, uninvited. It invades the home, consumes the peace, distorts reality. And the most terrifying thing is when it chooses to manifest through a child. This is the story of the most disturbing case in British paranormal history. The case that froze England in fear and dragged the world into a nightmare with no explanation. Its name is simple, but echoes like a scream in an empty house. Enfield. An ordinary place, until one night the impossible happened, and it never left. It all began in the suburb of Enfield in North London. The year was 1977. England still lived in the shadow of the war, working-class neighborhoods, humble families, and a quiet routine. Too quiet. At 284 Green Street lived Peggy Hodgson, a single mother with 4 children. Margaret, the oldest, Janet, 11, Johnny, 10, and little Billy, just 7. The house was small, damp, filled with old furniture. But there was warmth, there was love. Until one cold August night, something changed. Janet and Johnny were playing in their room when they heard a noise. Low, irregular, like furniture being dragged downstairs. "Mom," Janet called out. Silence. The two crept downstairs, thinking it was the wind or the cat. But the room was empty, and the sofa had moved. They didn't know it yet, but that was the first warning. In the days that followed, the sounds returned. Knocks, dry, hollow, coming from inside the walls. Peggy thought it was old pipes or wood contracting from the cold. But then, objects began to move on their own. A chair slid a few inches. A drawer opened in the middle of the night. Frames fell from the wall without reason. And the knocks grew louder, more violent, until, on one freezing night, Janet was thrown from her bed. Not fell, thrown. She cried, trembling, trying to explain, but no one believed her. "It was a dream, Janet. You must have tossed in your sleep." But she knew. Something was in the room. Something not human. Peggy began noticing changes in her daughter. Janet started talking to herself, murmuring in a low voice, eyes locked on nothing. She had nightmares every night. And she said, a voice spoke to her. A man's voice, old, harsh, as if it came from a throat filled with dirt. Desperate, the family called the police. 2 officers came. They talked. They searched the house. And then they saw the impossible. A chair moved on its own, slowly, dragged across the floor with no one near it. One officer signed a formal statement, but what could they do? There was no crime, only fear. The story spread. Newspapers showed up at the doorstep. "Haunted house in Enfield," the headlines read. Crowds gathered outside, taking photos, mocking, yelling. But inside, there was no spectacle, only panic. Janet was getting worse. She began falling into trances. Her voice would change, become guttural, grotesque, a tone no child could produce. And then she began speaking as someone else. "My name is Bill," she said. Eyes rolled back. Investigators took notes. She claimed Bill was a man who had lived there and died in the armchair downstairs. Janet's mother had never heard that name. Didn't even know someone had died there, but records confirmed it. Bill Wilkins, elderly, blind in one eye. Died from a cerebral hemorrhage, exactly where Janet said. It was real. The name, the history, the death. But how did she know? Paranormal researchers were called. Among them, Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, members of the Society for Psychical Research. They installed cameras, recorders, sensors, spent weeks watching, taking notes, and they heard things they would never forget. Knocks, voices, whispers. The voice, that deep voice, began to appear on recordings, even when Janet's mouth was closed. They tried everything to find an explanation, but there were no tricks, no wires, no hidden speakers. It was real, or too real to be fake. The press went deep into the story. Some called it a hoax, said Janet was imaginative, an actress, but she was under constant surveillance. And yet the events continued. She was seen levitating, thrown by invisible forces. Sometimes she appeared with bruises, scratches, red eyes, as if attacked by something no one could see. The family began to fall apart. No one slept, no one ate. Margaret claimed to see shadows on the stairs. Billy slept with his head under the covers. Johnny stopped speaking. Then came the nighttime attacks. Doors slamming violently, shattering windows, lights flickering before going dark forever, and Janet began disappearing from her room. She was found hours later sleeping in the closet or trembling downstairs in the dark. She said he took her, dragged her away, spoke to her inside her mind. The investigators were exhausted, confused, and more afraid. Science had no explanation. Religion hesitated, and Janet was changing. Then came the most controversial moment. An experiment. The investigators provoked the entity, asked direct questions, requested it speak, and the voice responded with fragmented sentences, curses, threats, a voice that didn't come from the girl's chest, but from somewhere deeper. As if something else was speaking through her, the recording went global. And to this day, no one has proven it was fake. But something even more disturbing was about to happen. One night, Janet entered a deeper trance than ever before. Her whole body trembled. She screamed in a voice that wasn't hers. She said she wasn't alone, said there were others, other voices, other presences, and they were all there, watching, waiting, wanting something. What started as noises became a domestic hell. An 11-year-old child became a channel for something unexplainable. But what exactly lived in that house? Was it truly the spirit of a dead old man? Or was there something far worse behind that voice? And what was discovered or buried in silence? Last time you heard the voice that claimed it wasn't alone. That night was burned into the memories of everyone in that house. The 11-year-old girl, face blank hollow, said there were multiple presences, that they all spoke, but not with human words, and only she could hear them clearly. She was the doorway, the conduit, or maybe the victim. Maurice Gross, the lead investigator, tried to stay skeptical. But after months inside that house, he no longer knew what to believe. Cameras filmed furniture moving without human touch. Audio captured knocks from nowhere, and the voices, they grew stronger, more aggressive, more complex. It was no longer just Bill. Janet began mentioning names no one recognized, entities that spoke in other languages, with different accents, sometimes more than one at once. The tapes were reviewed dozens of times. Phonetics experts, acousticians, medical professionals, everyone tried to find a logical answer. But all they found was fear. The voice of Bill spoke of his death, the chair he died in, the moment he lost his sight. Details only close family could have known, or someone who was there. Doctors confirmed Janet had no access to those records. She didn't read the papers. She wasn't visiting archives. She was just a child, and yet she wasn't. Guy Lyon Playfair, co-author of the investigation, began exploring the darker side of it all. He ran tests, confronted Janet, challenged the entity, and the response came quickly. Objects flew across the house. Books, dishes, toys, and the voice spoke of the investigators' personal lives, private things, details no one had ever revealed. They were being watched, or worse, infiltrated. Meanwhile, the media devoured the story. The BBC tried filming a special inside the house, but during recording, the equipment failed. Tapes were wiped, cameras jammed, microphones recorded only static. And when something was captured, it was a dry thud, heavy breathing, and in the background, a muffled, cruel laugh. The tapes were shelved, but the question lingered. Was it real, or the greatest child-led hoax in history? Skeptics began to circle. They accused Janet of trickery, said she was using ventriloquism to fake the voices, that her levitations were jumps from the bed caught mid-air. But none of them spent a night in that house. None of them saw the bruises or heard the voice. Even under constant surveillance, the phenomena continued. Even when tied to her bed, cameras at every angle, Janet spoke. And no one could explain how. The case dragged on. Months of reports, stacks of documents, hundreds of hours of tape. But the family was unraveling. Johnny fell ill. Billy stopped speaking for weeks. Margaret cried every night. Peggy barely ate. And Janet was slipping away. It was as if her mind was being pushed out. She laughed hysterically, stared at the ceiling for hours, said they watched her even in the bath, that they whispered behind the walls, and that one day, they'd take her for good. The church was contacted. Priests visited. Blessings were performed. Preliminary exorcisms. But they claimed it wasn't demonic possession, only a mild spiritual disturbance. Nothing changed. The voices continued. The manifestations never stopped. The public was divided. Some saw Janet as a victim, a martyr of the unknown. Others called her a gifted actress. But there was one thing no skeptic could dismiss: the recordings. Those tapes still exist, and to this day, No expert has reproduced those voices using only the vocal cords of a child. They compared her to voice actors, illusionists, forensic specialists. No one has matched it. Then came the silence. After nearly 2 years of terror, the activity began to fade. No exorcism, no resolution, no explanation. As if the house had been satisfied, Janet was sent to a psychiatric facility for a short time. The investigators moved on. The media chased newer tragedies, and Green Street returned to anonymity. Years passed. Janet grew up, tried to live a normal life, married, had children. But in interviews, she said she was never truly free. That sometimes, she still heard Bill's voice, that his face appeared in her nightmares, and she knew something in that house was real. Something no one ever understood. Some say it was all a game, a performance by a clever little girl. Others believe Janet was a pawn, used by something unseen. But the truth? No one knows. What remains is the terror and the voice. That slow, deep voice coming from inside a child. A voice that seemed to echo from somewhere far older than the house itself. Some of the tapes can still be heard. If you dare, search for them, listen, and then tell me. Do you still think it was all fake? Or maybe something is watching you now, in silence, waiting, like in Enfield.